Welcome back to the Girl at a Border podcast. You are going to be so glad you joined me because who does not want to listen to a conversation with two attorneys? Okay, I joke. No, it's serious. There are two attorneys here today, but we are going to have such a beautiful, unexpected conversation. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming the magnificent, very interesting Tracy Inscore. She is, yes, a fellow attorney. She practices, she had to explain it to me, land use and environmental law, but she also has such an intriguing focus on energy. She's an energy practitioner. I'm going to let her explain that because if I try to do that, I don't think I'm going to do her justice, but I cannot wait for you to meet my new friend. She's so intriguing and she's charting a new pathway for professionals to deal with burnout. And I cannot wait for you to hear from the magnificent Tracy Inscore. So welcome, friend.
Hi, Christine. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're here. And this conversation could go so many different directions, but I want to make sure that we hit all the highlights of your passion, what makes you so unique. When I read your application to be on the podcast, I was like, highlight, triple star, like I have to meet this person. And then when we had our conversation, I'm like, my instincts were correct because as an attorney, as a fellow, esquire, if you will, burnout is a real freaking thing. And so I'm so excited to dive into your unique approach and how you have maintained your practice because you don't advocate like just failing, but manage to interweave, that's not know if that's the right word, but this energy healing and helping others deal with burnout. That's exciting. However, before we dive in, I want to make sure you let our listeners know who you are as a human, because I believe in stories and everybody has a story. Yes, we all have missions. We all have passions. We all have, businesses that we are out there like wanting to grow. But I want to know the woman behind the mission. So what would you want our listeners to know about who you are as a person?
Well, thank you for that introduction. And I really love bridging those two worlds, the practical, sort of maybe more corporate world with the spiritual and the energetic and the intuitive. Because in my experience, when we are able to harness both our practical, logical, strengths and gifts and our abilities, and combine that with the more spiritual, energetic realms, we are so powerful and truly unstoppable. And it really allows us to do our work in a much more aligned way, in a much more fulfilling way.
Mm-hmm.
And part of why I was so drawn to this is I was seeing so many amazing people, especially in the legal profession, dealing with burnout and leaving the profession entirely.
Mm,
And a lot of them happen to be highly creative, empathic, kind, artistic people, the kind of people who you want to
mm,
be in these positions of power and
right.
authority. That's what the world needs. But
Yes.
the current paradigm and the current kind of structure of things was just so oppressive. And so, I kind of getting into my story, experienced the same thing with my own burnout early on in my law practice, and which led me on this healing path of discovering different alternative healing modalities, which I'm sure we'll get more into later. But really learning my own unique burnout origin story. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm so passionate about, helping my clients discover about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because the main thing I've learned is that burnout is never about the job. It's a symptom of much deeper underlying issues. And
Okay, can
so,
you hold on one second? I don't
yeah.
mean to jump in, but we lawyers, that's what we do, right? We jump in, we get excited. But I wanted to, if I may, because you said you had your own burnout story, would you be willing to share a little bit about, like, hey, I was doing all this, I was going along this way, making some buck, making an impact. but then something went derailed. So help us understand so that people can relate to your transformation.
Sure. So I was in the top 20% of my law school class, got a great job right out of law school. Ironically, I was a summer associate with that firm. And although I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity coming out of school in the middle of a recession in 2008, I
Right.
knew from my summer experience that it was not the right fit for me. But I felt so trapped and stuck because I had already incurred so much student loan debt that it
Mm,
was like, well, what do I do? It just seems like the logical thing to keep going. And because of certain things within my personality, and uh, I really was able to thrive in that role. And I was like the star associate, and I was doing really well. I was
mm,
performing really well outwardly. I was representing one of the largest companies in the world, and I had all these amazing opportunities, and I had bought my first home, and I was doing so well outwardly, and inside I was an absolute mess.
mm,
I was severely depressed, severely anxious, binge drinking every weekend, had a lot of kind of chronic, unexplained health issues, neck pain, you name it. And I felt like such an imposter. I know that a lot of
right.
people experience imposter syndrome. And for me, part of that was there was such a disconnect between my inner world and my outer exterior appearance, if you
Yes.
will. And I felt like if anyone knew how much I was struggling, oh my God, they wouldn't be trusting me with any of this.
Right.
Um, and I felt like a fake, like a phony. And it looked
Mm,
like everyone else was having such an easier time with it all. Like everyone else seemed to be doing so much better than I was. And of course, now I know that that's not the case, because I know how many people themselves are secretly struggling. But I hit that burnout point and I made a decision to leave full-time law practice. I went in-house for a while. I did some freelance editing work. I was a law professor. I was even a fitness instructor for a little while. I had all these really fun part-time gigs, and I managed to burn out again
really.
because the full-time law practice was never really the problem. I was the problem. I was the common denominator, and it was the energy that I brought into all of those things. Didn't matter what I was doing. I would bring
Mm,
that same energy into my relationships of over giving, over functioning, over performing, which really stemmed from a deep need for control. And so after kind of that second round of burnout and realizing, okay, it's not the job, this is something deeper within me, I, you know, started on a path, started meditating, which was quite a struggle at first. I could not quiet my mind, which is something
mm.
I hear from a lot of people, especially fellow
Especially
lawyers.
attorneys. Yeah. Yeah. I was just like, quiet your mind. Wow. What a concept. I've been doing the meditation thing too. And it is really challenging for people whose brains move really quickly.
Yeah, it's like trying to go from 100 to 0. Like we're not really meant to be able to completely turn our brain off.
Right.
And it's funny because I've yet to meet a person who's made it to adulthood without some sort of trauma. But
Mm,
so often we minimize things that had a very real impact on us because there are so many people who had it way worse than we did. So we fall into that comparison trap. And just because we didn't have any major trauma or abuse happen, we think that things in our childhood couldn't have affected us that much, or that we should just suck it up and get over it. We don't want to
mm,
fall into a victim mentality, but in denying the things that we experienced or failing to understand how they impacted us, we miss out on the opportunity to really take radical responsibility for ourselves now as adults. And so for me, part of that was tracing back, okay, when did this really all start for me?
mm. Yes.
And, growing up in the 80s and 90s, my parents were part of like a doomsday religious cult.
Oh boy.
And there was a lot of control, a lot of rules. They promoted, harsh physical discipline. My dad had a temper, so that was not a good combination
No.
because he was able to kind of take his frustrations out on me and feel justified because the church was telling him, this is good, this is beneficial. Um,
Spare the rod, spoil the child, right?
exactly,
Yes.
exactly. And there was a lot of yelling and all this feeling in like in a constant state of walking on eggshells just really contributed to my nervous system being out of whack, being in this constant state of hypervigilance. I was an only
Mm.
child, so I navigated all of this by myself.
So heavy. So
Yeah.
heavy.
And so I learned how to kind of stuff down and hide how I really felt. But I also learned that academic achievement and performing were ways to make sure that I could get my needs met, to make sure that no one was angry with me. And it gave me a sense of control, gave me a way to make sure my needs were met. And so that was then reinforced with a lot of praise and reward. So my entire sense of self-worth and value became tied to performing, achieving, doing rescuing, helping, fixing, you name it. It was the
Mm.
uh, perfect storm to set the stage for burnout later in life. So if we think of
Mm.
burnout as a fire, that flame was already smoldering within me from a very young age. And then going to law school and my law career was just like pouring gasoline on that fire.
Oh my gosh. Oh, it's so much good here. I don't even know where to start. Whew, it's getting emotional. And I think I got emotional when we were talking originally because I didn't grow up in a doomsday cult and I wasn't part of one, but we were part of a very conservative evangelical church where I never felt like I fit in, never
Mhm.
felt like I quite measured up. And so I was always trying to fit into a mold that I was just never designed for. And that in large part was the birthplace of Girl Out of Order, was to find a way to create a community where women could come in as they are and learn how to celebrate who and how they were designed to be. And when I think about your background and growing up, I mean, I don't even know if I missed this when we originally talked, but I mean, we talked about the doomsday cult, which is just such a profoundly damaging experience. But the fact that you shouldered it without any siblings at all to share that, it just makes so much sense to me that you then became a hyperachiever.
Mhm.
And I wanted to dive into the really, really important point. And listeners, I hope you are listening because I want you to catch this. This isn't about being a lawyer. She was teaching fitness classes. It's about what you bring to the table, whatever that table is, whatever activity that is. If you are dragging along your trauma or your disempowering habits, beliefs, patterns, you're going to still come out on the other side in a state of burnout. Is that accurately sum it up?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
That's because we're simpatico, sister. I mean, we're just feeling each other. So, if you could, like, because we talk about burnout and we sometimes talk around it, but could you really let's peel back the layers. Let's really pull it apart and help our listeners. Because maybe you're talking to, I'm sure you're talking to a stay-at-home mom, which I was one for 10 years. And she's going, well, I don't have to get up and leave the house. I got it pretty good. But inside she's dying. Like, help us understand how this concept of burnout is universal.
Yes, so burnout can happen to anyone in any situation. It may have nothing to do with being in a workplace at all. So stay-at-home moms, caregivers, homeschooling moms, really anybody, because from an energy medicine perspective, burnout is caused by being in a chronic state of depletion. And
Mm,
that's mentally, physically, emotionally, even spiritually, for an extended period of time. So
wow.
your life force is depleted. So even if the external stressor or situation were to get better or go away, let's say, your newborn baby is now sleeping through the night, or let's say it's a job and you've just had a really stressful 3 months. Normally we have the resilience to bounce back once that season of life kind of lets up a little bit,
Hmm.
the deadline is met, the trial is over, whatever. Maybe we get some really good sleep and do a lot of self-care. We take a vacation and we feel better, but it doesn't work that way with burnout.
Mm.
I've heard it being described as being tired at the soul level.
Oh, stop right there. We gotta make sure we don't pass that by. Two things you said, and I want to land on this last thing you just said. You said it is a chronic state of depletion. Because we think
Mhm.
about chronic stress. In fact, I was just talking with somebody a little bit ago about, she helps treat chronic stress. But there's something really profound about that phrase, that chronic state of depletion, because it goes beyond stress.
Yeah,
It's like when they talk about how when you don't eat enough, your body starts to actually, sorry for the graphicness, but devour itself, right?
right.
It really starts to feed on itself because our body's designed to survive. So then it will take away the good parts in order to survive. And so when you use that phrase, that's what came to my mind. I was like, we're literally devouring our own lives.
So true.
Wow.
Yes, it's
It's
so
it's it,
true.
it breaks my heart because I've lived it. I mean, I had 4 kids in 6 years. I literally was the crazy shit show, clown show of taking 642 and brand new to Target in the winter because that was brilliant. Yes, they are all mine, and yes, my husband does have 4 girls. But honestly, when you said that, it brought it all back for me. And then it also brought it all back for me when I went back into practice, and now I'm running a household, trying to still do all the things, and then trying to figure out how to be an attorney and not commit malpractice and serve my clients to a high level. And it was a chronic state of depletion. I stopped sleeping. I wasn't eating well. I had terrible insomnia. I was diagnosed with depression. And it was like, like you said, you look at your life and you're like, then you're even more depressed because your life on paper looks amazing.
So that exactly right. And everything is energy, and the human body is essentially a conduit for energy. It's meant to flow to us and through us so that we can give
Mm.
and receive. And so for a number of reasons, our energy system can become blocked and imbalanced, and we find ourselves in a state of far more energy going out than we have coming back in to
Mm.
replenish us. And sometimes that's because, in addition to our tendencies of overgiving, overworking, overachieving, we've also cut ourselves off from receiving, from being
Mm.
replenished. So
Oh, yes.
I've noticed that my clients often have a lot of trouble with receiving, whether that's receiving help, receiving gifts, receiving compliments, even receiving adequate compensation for their work so that maybe
Oh,
they could work a little less,
mic
right?
drop moment there, especially for women in any profession, but in the legal profession, you worked in a big firm, and I would bet money, and I'm not a gambler. I'd bet money you were paid less than your male counterparts.
Yeah, I probably was. So it's an overall problem with letting things in
Mm-hmm.
and allowing as much as the doing. But I
Wow,
think what
yes.
makes burnout different from just stress, because you really nailed it when you said like it's not just the stress that's the problem, because we are so powerful and amazing, and we are equipped to handle stressful situations and to be resilient and bounce back. But
Yes.
what makes burnout different is a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. It's
Mm.
feeling disengaged and detached, leaning more towards that depression where we're no
Yes.
longer as productive. We find ourselves in a freeze state, and it becomes hard to just complete the most basic tasks. And so things like
Mm.
exhaustion or getting sick more frequently. And of course, it can be tough to tell the difference sometimes between something like clinical depression, which I've also been diagnosed with, and burnout. And sometimes you can have both at the same time. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I experienced. And it was like, well, am I depressed because I'm burned out, or am I burned out because I'm depressed?
Oh,
And
man. Yes.
certainly, if you have depression or any chronic health condition or chronic pain, that can make you susceptible to burnout in the first place because you're probably already spending so much energy trying to manage your symptoms and feel better. But, we really have to look at burnout from a holistic perspective because, it really goes back to what I was saying before about how it's really just a symptom.
Wow. Okay. That's so powerful. I swear you are literally my sister from another mister. It just cracks me up. Because when we were talking, we were just like, oh my gosh, we could talk all day because we're mirrors in a lot of respects. You know, you're a half a generation younger than me, but what you're saying is absolutely relatable because it crosses generations, it crosses professions, it crosses religions. And that's why I mean, there's so many reasons I was fired up to bring you on the program and introduce you to my community. And I cannot wait to get to the EFT, and we're going to get there. But I just want women to hear that there's so much. I mean, I beat this drum so many times on my podcast and in my community, that there is such profound healing power when we tell our stories. It's not easy, especially for us hard charging, high performing attorneys to say, hey, I was doing all the things and I was utterly miserable. And I felt like a complete failure, even though on paper I look like a success. But Tracy, you coming on this program and you starting this other side of your business and tending to the soul of attorneys, tending to the soul of professionals is done because you're willing to tell your story. And I want to honor you for that.
Thank you so much. And yes, it has definitely made me more empathic. Not only am I able to bring that empathy to my work as an attorney in dealing with, fellow attorneys or opposing counsel, clients, but also in my work of helping fellow lawyers to make these changes in their lives. Because I'm
Yeah.
living it with you. I'm not so far removed. I'm still, like you said, I'm still practicing part-time. So I get it. I really do.
Well, I love that. And so, okay, so let's change gears just a little bit because I mean, I think we've done a really thorough job. And sisters, if you're not getting this, you got to go back and rewind and listen again. Burnout is universal. And it's really important that you get the help and support to discern and suss out what's burnout, what's depression, because what we're about ready to go into is some more natural energy type healing. And I just want to have a disclaimer. Listen to me, little lawyer here. I just want to have a disclaimer that this is not a replacement for mental health help or medical advice in any way, shape, or form. What I know Tracy's going to share with you is something that I've been exposed to through my work in Tony Robbins' organization and a really dear friend of mine named Jenny, who does incredible work with this EFT tapping. And I cannot wait for Tracy to share this with. But if you have genuine feelings of depression or hopelessness, please, please, please seek medical advice and listen to what my friend Tracy is going to share with you because it is powerful. And I truly believe that when we take a holistic approach to our health and we don't shut down, foreclose, or slam the door on concepts before we've really prayed about it, meditated on it, and investigated it, we might be missing something. So I'm going to give the floor back to Tracy here to share a little bit about EFT. First of all, what the heck does it stand for? Explain to people what it is and then how it plays out in the healing practice.
Sure. So EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques, commonly known as tapping, and it involves, as the name implies, tapping on certain meridian points in the body in a specific sequence while we focus on an emotion or a memory or a problem. It could really be almost anything. And so it's based in traditional Chinese medicine, and it centers around going back to that core premise that everything is energy and that all negative emotion and really by extension health issues as well are caused by energy blockages within the body. So that's the premise of acupuncture. And we're vibrational beings, and every emotion and experience carries a certain vibration or frequency. We're basically like little sponges. And, you may have heard the sayings, our issues are stored in our tissues, or
Mm.
our biography becomes our biology. The body keeps the score.
Oh,
And
mm,
our body is a living, breathing record of everything that we've ever experienced. And
mm.
sometimes just like a vinyl record might get scratched and it won't play properly anymore, it jumps and it skips. Our emotional experiences can do the same thing within our body. And we find ourselves being triggered by things, feeling that emotional charge or having like a visceral physical reaction when we think about a past event.
Mm,
I'm sure, so many of us can relate to that, where you can feel your face getting flushed or your stomach getting tight just at the thought of something that could have happened, 10 or 15 years ago. That
yes.
means that incident is still very much active within your energy body.
Mm-hmm.
And so the meridian system is like an energetic highway running through the body, and tapping allows us to restore the proper flow of that energy throughout that system.
Mm,
And so there's 12 main meridians. Each one corresponds to a specific part of the body, whether it's the lung or the liver. And our life force energy, or our chi, is thought to flow through these meridians. And when there's any sort of blockage, that's when the physical ailments and the illnesses and the emotional issues can start to happen. So traditional Chinese medicine and the practice of acupuncture were really way ahead of their time, thousands of years ago, in identifying the meridian system, which really corresponds to the framework of the nervous system, as we're really only beginning to understand it in modern Western medicine. So
mm,
most of us are familiar with acupuncture, which involves, placing needles at certain points along these meridians.
mm,
Thankfully, EFT, the founder of EFT, a man named Gary Craig, identified there's certain meridian points on the head and the upper torso that are especially useful for dealing with emotions, and found that by applying light pressure or tapping on these points just with your fingertips, we can essentially get the same results as acupuncture, but without needles.
oh, thank God, because
I
I'm not
know,
a fan of
right?
me. I've got to be honest. I had an acupuncturist on and I was like, I want to believe, I want to believe, I want to believe. I'm not a fan of needles.
I am not either. I'm not either. And what I love about EFT is that even though it's rooted in this ancient practice, it has been clinically proven effective in treating anxiety and
Mhm.
PTSD, because we know that when we tap, it sends calming signals to the amygdala in the brain, which calms the nervous system and gets us out of that chronic fight or flight state. And it actually helps us to create new neural pathways
Mhm.
relative to certain memories or stressful events, which increases our resilience long term and helps us be, better equipped to prevent burnout. And I should add too that although,
Yeah.
EFT can be used for really any issue, nothing necessarily has to be wrong for you to use EFT and benefit from it. It's an amazing tool for peak performance, to get clarity. I like to use it to help brainstorm creative solutions.
Mm.
So even if let's say you're thriving right now and you're loving your work, loving your career, that's awesome. I would say this could still be so beneficial for you to maybe get the same results with a lot less effort, or to kind of supercharge what you're already doing. And it's just an amazing preventative tool to deal with that daily stress and maintenance as like a self-care technique
Mhm.
before we reach that critical burnout point.
Okay, I love that. Oh, so much goodness here. So I'm gonna be really honest. I'm gonna confess to you. Like I've tried tapping and being your typical attorney, super cynical, right?
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes when we are, it's been my experience when I'm trying to open my mind to new outside the box treatments, and I have a lot of trauma in my past. I have childhood sexual abuse. I have, date rape. I have, infidelity in my marriage, like major, major traumas that have lodged in my body. So I'm super open to it. What I would ask you, I don't know if I'm a really good question here, but what I would ask you is like when you're coming to somebody such as myself, okay, you're like looking at me going, woman, you are a prime candidate for this. But then there's a block in my brain that says, okay, I'm tapping my head, I'm tapping my brow. I'm like, I'm so bored. My brain is going elsewhere. I feel like a monkey. Like, how do you get, oh, boy, this is kind of a bumbly question. So I hope you know where I'm going. How do you
Mhm.
get somebody like me to like, what do I do to open my mind and kind of get rid of those preconceived notions that, can I be honest? This is bullshit. This is bullshit. This is bullshit. I mean, honestly, and I don't want to be stuck there. So how do you get, like, how do I get past that? Because I believe in the concept.
I was exactly the same way. Let me
Oh,
just
thank
start
God.
by saying that. I heard about EFT and I didn't try it for like 2 years because I was so skeptical and I thought that's too good to be true and that
Right?
sounds too simple and I'm sure that wouldn't work for me, all the reasons. Long story short, obviously I tried it and was blown away by the results I got and I thought I need to help this reach as many people as possible. But I would start by saying that we actually need to get you out of your head and
Mm,
we really need to use this as a somatic technique. So, somatic meaning within the body. And that is so true for so many of us that we are maybe overdeveloped with the cognitive strategies to deal with
mm,
our trauma and past pain and stress. And that's great.
mm,
That's probably served us very well in many areas of our life, but it causes a major disconnect between the brain and the body. And I found it interesting that 80% of the communication is actually going from our body to our brain.
right.
Only about 20% goes from our brain to our body.
Okay, mic drop for a second. Say that one more time because I don't want anyone to miss that.
Yeah, so in terms of the communications between our brain and our body, 80% is coming from the body to the brain. Only 20% is going from our brain to our body. But what do? We focus excessively on that 20% instead of maybe flipping that, which is very counterintuitive, dropping into the body and allowing that 80% to work for us instead of working against us.
Wow.
Um, and so, one thing that I focus on when I'm starting work with a client is where do you feel these emotions within your body? And the first time someone asked me that, I had a therapist ask me that before I had done
Mhm.
any of this work. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you mean, where in my body? It's in my head. Like, I
I
was
know, right?
so yeah, I was so disconnected. And we don't always have to find the right words to describe what we're feeling or describe even what happened to us. And
Mm.
in fact, with a lot of clients who do have trauma in their background, we have many techniques to work with trauma where they don't even have to tell their story.
Oh, that's so powerful, Tracy, what you just said there. We can work through trauma without having to speak the story if we're not ready to find that voice. That's so
Mhm.
beautiful and so important as we go into exploring a little bit more with the EFT. And I'm going to have you do a demonstration because this is on YouTube too. So, by the way, if you're just listening to this, you're going to be missing something. So, you're going to want to subscribe to my YouTube channel. But I want you to show people that. But it's important that, especially listeners, if you're carrying trauma of any kind and it's just not at a point in your life where you want to speak it out, this can be such a beautiful, powerful tool to still be working behind the scenes. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is so accurate. We really have techniques to meet someone wherever they are, whether that is playing the movie in their mind or if they're not even ready to go there yet, um, to kind of describe it as the thing that I'm not thinking about. And
Ooh.
if I were to give this a number between 0 and 10, how much would I think that that thing might be bothering me? We can keep it so far removed. But the thing
Mm,
is, the body remembers. So we don't need to be overly concerned with what we're thinking and saying.
mm.
And we can allow the body to start its own natural healing work. And what's so cool is that things will start to come up as they're ready to be addressed and dealt with. Your
Oh, I love that.
subconscious is always trying to keep you safe and it knows, okay, let's let this memory surface.
Yes.
But it's not like a fire hose. It's not we don't want that. And you're so right that sometimes in traditional talk therapy, which but as you said, I'm not a therapist and I'm a big fan of therapy. However, if you don't have a trauma informed therapist, sometimes retelling the story over and over just re-traumatizes you
Mm,
unless you have that somatic technique, that physical outlet to give your body the message that it's safe.
Yes. Yes. And I also wanted to highlight something you said. I mean, first of all, kudos to all the therapists out there, especially the trauma-informed therapists. There's a place for, I believe, so many of these mechanisms, but I want to make sure our listeners heard what we said. Like, just because you aren't 100% on board with this yet, doesn't mean you shouldn't give it a try. I always tell people it's simple, but it's not easy. And if you haven't tried what seems too simplistic, then how can you say it's not effective? So if you're dealing with either entrenched traumas or burnout or impending burnout, or you just feel depleted, maybe it's not to the level of burnout, but you know that you cannot. It's like when you're driving your car and you can hear it revving, you're like, yeah, it's gonna crash. And maybe you haven't crashed yet, but you're on your way. Like, what do you got to lose? Right? Like, what do you have to lose? You've got this amazing person that you're listening to with this incredible wealth of experience. And she's come from a place of cynicism. And there's no way where she was stuck in her head. And then she learned what it meant to drop into your body, because that's a phrase we use when we've been doing some of this work. But I want to say to our listeners, like, dropping into your body might sound woo-woo, but I would encourage you to open your mind to a little bit of the woo, even if you're not ready for the woo woo, because dropping into your body just simply means you're connecting to this vessel that is carrying around your soul. Because we all know we have a body, and the more we can connect our body, mind, and spirit, the more congruent our life is going to be, and the better chance we have to heal. That's my little preachy. Ooh, gotta get off my little soapbox here.
So good.
But okay, so I want you to explain the tapping technique. And since we are on YouTube as well, if you could be showing whoever's watching what it looks like, because I mean, just hearing it is a little bit hard to conceptualize, but if they can put together the hearing and explaining it so they can say, okay, all right, fine, I'm ready to open my mind to it. All right, give it to me.
Sure. So the very first thing we would do is identify an issue that you'd like to work on. And you would do this on your own if you were watching a YouTube video or trying this technique on your own. But in a session with a client, we want to be as specific as possible and clear one issue before we try to go on and deal with anything else. So once we identified your issue, I would ask you to rate it on a subjective scale, 0 to 10. 10 might be, this is absolutely unbearable and I can't stand it. 1 would be like, it's not bothering me at all, because we check back at the end to rate the effectiveness and see where you are. So once we have your problem identified, we say 3 setup statements, and these are designed to reduce any resistance that you might have to addressing this problem. And as we say those 3 statements, I'll have the client tap on the side of their hand. We call that the karate chop point, this fleshy side of the hand. And you might say things like, even though I am so frustrated with my boss, I am open to looking at this situation without judgment. It's typically in that even though format where you're acknowledging the problem, but you're saying, you know what, I love myself anyway. I accept myself anyway, or I'm doing the very best that I can. So we'll modify those statements depending on the situation.
Mhm.
The next point is the top of the head.
You do it with one hand or 2 hands?
So that great question. You can use both hands. So there's some points where we go both sides, but either way is totally effective. And you can do left or right, one hand or 2. I like to go to the back of the neck after the top of the head, which is maybe some practitioners don't. Back to the top of the head. Now, as we move to each point, I'm guiding the client to say a specific statement based on what they've shared with me. So it might be like, I am so angry right now. And I'm asking them to feel that anger as we're talking. We would next go to the inside corner of the eyebrow.
With
So
just
right up.
one hand?
I'm using one hand. Usually when I'm doing a session, I'm like writing notes with one hand. So I've gotten used to tapping with one. You can
Okay.
also use 2.
Does it matter which eyebrow?
It does not matter which eyebrow. I will say though that sometimes we can get some clues from where we're tapping. So the right side of the body is typically linked to the more masculine energy. The left side of the body might be more feminine. So that can sometimes give us a clue depending on what we're working on or which side you naturally want to are guided to start tapping on. We then go to the side of the eye. And again, with each point, we're saying a specific statement, or sometimes I might just ask the client to really connect with that feeling. Sometimes I might say, just allow whatever is going to come up for you right now to just come up. Let's go under, and then we go under the eye. So for example, under the eye is the point that's linked to the stomach and to fear.
Oh, wow.
And so sometimes what is really cool is I'll see a client get frozen or stuck on a certain spot, like, because usually they're mirroring me just like you are right now. And let's say
Mhm.
I'll move down to right under the nose, but they'll stay stuck back under the eye. It's like
Okay.
they're watching me, but they keep tapping there. And then
Okay.
that's my cue to say, what's this fear? Do you have any fear coming up around this? Because that's telling me, their body is telling me there's
Mm.
something there that's wanting to be addressed. Below the nose, this point right here, that might correspond to things that need to be said.
Hmm.
So if I see a client really get stuck here, I'll say, is there anything that you would want to tell that person, or anything that you would like to say that you haven't been able to say? Then we go under the mouth. We go to the collarbone points, so just right on the clavicle.
Is it above or below? I've always wondered, is it above or below the clavicle? Or
I
the
do it
right?
like just slightly below. There's like a little
Okay.
notch you'll feel,
I'm
but
so glad I'm asking. I've always wanted to ask these questions.
yeah, you don't have to get it exactly right because you're creating that vibration and you're gonna get it right. And then I like to use the center of the chest, the thymus point. So I'll just make a fist and just gently thump in the center of my chest. And from there, we go under the arm. So just a few inches below the armpit, like right at for ladies, the bra strap area. And next, I will typically have the client tap their wrists. They can either tap the wrist together or tap either wrist. Now, depending on the issue we're working on, sometimes I'll do an extended technique where we tap on each of the fingers. And then there's a technique we might use with some eye movement, some humming, singing a tune, counting. But I might not use that in every circumstance. And then we go back to the side of the hand. That would be one round.
Do you switch sides?
Sometimes I will find that I instinctively switch sides, and I will always notice that and think, okay, what's that about?
Mm.
Like I said, as practitioner, I'm right-handed, so I'm used to keeping a pen in my right hand as things are coming up from the client and tapping with my left. When I tap just for me, or when I'm the client working with a practitioner,
Mhm.
I'll tap with my right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So when you work with somebody who's, let's say you said that's one round, do
Mhm.
you have like an average, like how many rounds? Because you were saying like, I'm so angry. Obviously you don't want to stay in that place. So at some
Mhm.
point, presumably it shifts to the emotions they want to have. Is that correct?
So the whole time I'll be checking in with body language, asking where they are on that 0 to 10 scale. Sometimes we might just stop and say, okay, I want you to try to access that anger. Does it feel further away? Is it closer? The majority of the time, after about one round, sometimes still in that first round, they're like, no, that feels way less. Like maybe
Hmm.
it was an 8 and now they're at a 3. Anything I would say 3 and below means then we're kind of ready to move on and infuse with the positive and focus on, all right, we've cleared what we didn't want. Now let's add in what we
Mhm.
do want. Sometimes people will make this mistake of trying to do that too soon, though, and they haven't fully cleared the issue. And then it's like they're just trying to kind of cover up with the more positive affirmations. So it's really just kind of an intuitive process of really getting to know the client and looking for the signs that they really have fully integrated that clearing and that they are ready to go on to the next thing.
Wow. So tell us, and obviously no names, but can give us a success story. Somebody that you, not that you don't have lots to choose from, I'm sure you do, but a success story of somebody who's come to you just flat out burned out, and then how the EFT practice, excuse me, has like how it turned this person around. Can you give us an example?
Oh, yeah. So this kind of ties in with some of my favorite work, which is helping people decode their own unique burnout archetype, meaning
Okay.
where it started and how this happened, what in their usually childhood family of origin sort of started this pattern. And so I was working with an entrepreneur, and she was really struggling with keeping good employees. Like the recruiting and onboarding process would go really well, but she had really high turnover, and she was constantly being disappointed by kind of these flaky employees who weren't staying very long, weren't committed. And in our work together, we uncovered a belief that she had that everyone leaves
Hmm.
because her dad had left the family. There was a lot of estrangement and abandonment on both sides of the family, right? Like a pattern of siblings not speaking to each other, just a lot of abandonment. And so we found that this core wound was showing up in her business.
Hmm.
And once she addressed it, the first thing that happened is she was actually inspired to make some very practical changes to the structure of her business that actually made it a better work environment. And she was also able to
Hmm.
just make some practical changes to her recruiting and hiring process that helped her to vet the candidates a little bit better. She had a lot of creative ideas come to her that made things flow a lot better. She was able to ask and reach out for help from, business consultants, and to, instead of kind of sitting in that shame of like, what's wrong with me and I'm failing as a business owner,
Mm-hmm.
we were kind of able to work through some of those fears. And she was then able to better use her intuition the
Hmm.
next times that she interviewed potential candidates. And since that energy of everyone's going to leave me was no longer active within her, she
Mm-hmm.
was able to attract and connect with people who had a higher level of commitment and who were actually going to stay for the long haul. And I just love that because that's going back to like combining that practical with the energetic.
I love that. You said something earlier and I meant to hit on it. So I'm going to circle back because it's very dovetails with what we just talked about with the burnout story. So my real passion is identity work. Like I help women reclaim their true identities, build compelling lives by teaching them these, what I call the 5 phases of identity creation. And so much of what I teach in this identity creation is creating those new neural pathways, those clearing out, like when we break down and identify these disempowering beliefs that have kept us stuck and spinning in circles on these old narratives, when we can finally bust through them, identify them, and then rob them, starve them of the power they've had, we open up these neural pathways. And I found so similar to what you do. It feels like as I'm thinking this, like, oh my gosh, I got to get back to this EFT. I need to open my brain to it again because it dovetails so much with the identity work that I do with women. And so when I think about that woman you just shared, it's like you weren't failing, you were just stuck in your old narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so by helping clear, I feel like it's just like clearing, it's like you think of those like the on the ice hockey, the Zambonis going across the ice, and not just clearing all the crap off the top, but smoothing out the surface and filling in all the crevices. And so what we're doing is we're filling in the cracks of the crap that we've believed with the truth that is actually readily available. And once we do that, all of a sudden it's like, clear eyes, like my mom and dad, when they got their hearing aids, they didn't realize how much they were missing. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And we don't realize how much our subconscious mind is running the show. That's like 90% of our brain activity is is subconscious. And the number one goal of our subconscious is to keep us safe. It's a
Mhm.
very primal, primitive part of us that we we need in this human experience. We don't want to disown that part of ourselves, but it interprets familiarity as safety, which is why we
Ooh.
find ourselves in these undesirable patterns where this woman was saying, I don't want this. This is terrible. This is hurting my business. This is so frustrating. But one of the other, little aspects we discovered was, as painful as all that was, as painful as the leaving was, what
Mm-hmm.
was even scarier than that was actually that people would stay.
Ooh, that's a
Because
mic drop moment too.
when everyone leaves, you never learn repair. You never learn how to
Mm.
have those like deeper, tougher conversations and accept feedback and accept criticism and work through all of the things that it takes to be in relationship with someone, whether it's a coworker or a subordinate employee, it doesn't matter. And so in a way, her subconscious was keeping her so safe by ensuring that people did keep leaving.
Mm. Yeah, it reminds me of when someone would say that, ask you a question of like, what is your big fear? Well, I have fear of failure. And then as you start to pull back the layers, you're like, yeah, but do you have fear of success? Is
Yeah.
your fear of failure balancing out with your fear of success? Because I think for me, as I'm growing my business and growing my podcast, there is that fear of success, that fear of like, can I handle it? Am I capable? Am I equipped? Do I have what it takes to be effective and manage something that's getting bigger? And it
Mm.
sounds like, oh, first world problems, lady, but it's not, that's not fair. We can't dismiss that. We can't minimize what's keeping us stuck just because it doesn't match up. I'm not homeless or I'm not food insecure or I'm not in jail. I mean, people have horrific things that happen to them. But what I would say to our listeners, and I can see you even nodding your head, it's like, what is your stuckness? What's keeping you on the edge of burnout, or what has pushed you over the edge? And now you're flaming out. Like, just because it doesn't match up with Jane down the street, whose husband abandoned the family, doesn't mean it's not real to you. And you owe it to yourself to give yourself, your body, your brain, your spirit, your soul, the best chance to have a compelling life.
That is so true. And when you have a big calling on your life and a big purpose for your life, you staying in that state of stuckness or brokenness or not enoughness, that helps no one. So really,
Right.
if you want to make that bigger impact and be able to change some of those things that you don't like when you look out into the world and see what's going on, actually the best way to do that is to really tend to yourself
Mm,
and to clear out anything that's getting in the way of you stepping into your unique gifts and purpose, because how dare you deny the world of your
yes.
we need that. We
Oh
need
my God.
you to show up that way.
So beautiful that you said that, because I say this a lot on my podcast and in my Girl Out of Order community on Facebook. We need you to share in here because the world needs what only you can provide.
Mm.
Nobody has your unique story, Tracy. Nobody has my unique story. You might want to minimize and categorize and diminish your story because it doesn't match up with somebody else's, but you, by the very definition that you are you, makes you unique. And I think back to something else that you said, because you and I shared a little bit about our religious issues, if you will.
Mhm.
And so often in my early parenting and in my early marriage, the messages I got from the church was like, we would scoff at like Dr. Phil's book that said self matter, you matter or something like that. And I was like, oh, that's just so prideful. Like, and what I did is I bought into a narrative that just taught me that self denial was the pathway to godliness. And there's nothing wrong with dying to yourself in certain circumstances. Like I've had to die to myself the last 2 days. I had a sick dog, a sick kid, that's not what I'm talking about, but it's that chronic, repetitive squelching of your desires that leaves women, especially women in midlife when their kids are older or their jobs are advancing, or maybe their jobs are winding down and they go, when's the last time I even asked the question, what do I want? it's like, it's slow erosion sometimes. It's not an atomic bomb. And so I love that. I love what you said about EFT coming in hot before the house is on fire.
Mhm.
So how would you, practically speaking, I love to get practical on my podcast. Practically speaking, let's say I'm in my mid-30s. I got a rockin' marriage. I love my man. Our sex is great. Our kids are fabulous. It's not perfect. It's a little hard, but life is pretty good. Where would you tell me Where would you tell me to start? Because let's say I'm not on the edge of burnout. I'm really happy, but we want to get on the front end of that, right? We don't want to
Mhm.
wait till the wheels are coming off the car. How do you incorporate it into your life?
Yeah, I would say just using it to take the edge off of those daily stressors. So even
Mhm.
if you're overwhelmingly happy with your life, of course, there are still going to be times and things that come up, whether it's sitting in bad traffic or spilling your coffee or like whatever stresses come up throughout your day. You might want to incorporate EFT as a part of your morning wake up routine or as part of
Right.
your nighttime ritual to sort of just clear your mind and to, prepare for the next day. So I would say, again, nothing really has to be wrong. And in fact, we can celebrate everything that's going right in your
Yay.
life.
Yeah.
And you can use this to really uh, integrate and accentuate what's already working for you. Um, so it's so good for your nervous system. It's so good for the mind body connection that even if, let's say, you don't have a specific issue, so you don't have anything to say necessarily as you tap, you can really just be with your thoughts, be with whatever feelings are coming up,
Hmm.
enjoy that feeling of deeper relaxation. So really anyone can try this. There's tons of free resources out there. I would say only if you do have particular trauma that you're wanting to work through, then absolutely reach out to a qualified practitioner. But
Hmm.
other than that, this is really meant to be done as a self-healing tool on your own whenever you need it. You do not need to go anywhere or like make an appointment. Yes, I work with clients to work through those bigger issues or areas where they're stuck or really need
Hmm.
extra support. But I also encourage them to do this as a daily practice on their own.
I love that. All right. So two final questions. One, where can everybody find you?
So my website is tapoutburnout.com.
Love
And
it.
I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, so you can find me there.
Excellent. You want to find this woman. She's such a beacon of hope. And I love the example that you're setting, that you haven't just, sometimes it's okay and necessary to burn the boats to take the island, but you've stayed on the island with your boats. You're still practicing law. You're still contributing in that way, but yet you found a beautiful way to manage it all. I have one final question for you, and it's shamelessly ripped off from Jen Hatmaker's podcast. I give her credit every time, but I love this question
Mhm.
and I can't think of any way to better ask it of my guests. You can answer it however you want. Funny, serious, doesn't matter. What is saving your life right now?
I would say really knowing myself at this particular stage of my life. I have never put more effort and intention into knowing who I truly am and what I truly need. And I'm able to just give that to myself for really the first time. And it's freaking amazing.
Oh, I love that. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Christine.
Okay, but seriously, how freaking amazing is Tracy Inscore? She is such a beautiful badass. And what I love about her is she's got this incredible blend of the feminine and the masculine. She's so dialed into this intense profession, but with this balance and sprinkle of spirituality and groundedness. And I'm going to do some work with her. And I hope that you will go to all the places that you can find Tracy and just, if you're not in a place of burnout, fantastic, celebrate, but do your preventative maintenance so that you never get to the point where you are so burned out that you just can't take another step. Why would you want to get there? Let's do this EFT together because I am recommitting to it, and I hope you will too. We're in this together as a tribe of girls out of order, and I'll see you next time.